is my presentation on test automation trends. The purpose of this is really just for me to share kind of what I've seen in the QA and automation market. My focus has been primarily in Austin, but since 2020, it's really changed where I find myself now supporting remote companies and sometimes our Dallas office. So it's been a little bit more difficult to analyze just the Austin market. So bear with me if some of this may seem a little bit skewed. But I'll provide like a high level overview of hiring and testing trends. Excuse my dogs. And to be transparent, you know, if you want to dive into like some of the more technical questions, I may have to revert to some of the co-organizers here or other people that I've worked with to kind of help field those. So just want to be really frank on that. But yeah, so this talk will be, Penelope, really? Will be a little more focused on the automation side of QA, as that's more of what I have focused on the past couple of years. So yeah, here's a brief little outline of what I'll cover for you guys. Just a quick introduction of myself in case we haven't had the opportunity to meet or speak in the past, because I think there are some new people here. I'll cover some of the hiring trends that I've seen. We'll also talk a little bit about titles. I know that's always a fun topic in QA. And then different kind of languages that I've seen an uptick in requests for, technology trends in general, different types of testing that's been increasing. I'll cover salary bands, as well as different things that can help you kind of stay competitive in today's market and staying ahead of some of these trends. And then we'll open up the floor, do some Q&A, and I really want to get y'all's opinions on some of this stuff too. So a little bit about myself. I'm a full desk recruiter, and I'm focused on test automation. Essentially, what that means is I work directly with hiring managers and candidates in trying to bridge that gap. And so I actually like this approach because there's not necessarily like a middleman. And so I'm able to really understand the requirements in full and work a lot closer, I feel like, with my clients and candidates that way. So actually, I really like that approach. I've been doing it since January of 2019, and I have been focused just on Austin, Texas up until last year. I am not from Austin, so just want to let you guys know that. From the Southeast Texas area, and moved here in about 2015 to finish my degree at Texas State. My degree is in psychology and applied sociology, which is basically a fancy way of saying I know how to use statistics to analyze society. Haven't really done that in a while. And something too is like this role has just made me realize, you know, how interesting it is to kind of be in the technology field, because a lot of the companies I work with directly impact my life or are products that I've personally used. And so it's just really cool to kind of be a part of this community. And as y'all heard me say, I am a dog mom to two 10-year-old Chihuahuas and a little scruffy Jack Russell mix named Willard. So you may hear them yipping in the background here and there. So yeah, let's dive into hiring. So of course, things were slowed down the first half of 2020, as I'm sure many people experienced. There was a dip where companies were either putting their hires on pause or moving things offshore around QA to try and cut budgets. But I saw that towards more the summer months in the back half of the year, that started to pick up, I think, as people got more adjusted to whatever the working remotely style was, or just being able to onboard people and trusting that, you know, the market is going to keep going up and stay, you know, moving. But it's definitely had its own challenges. I saw kind of during this time a shift towards more QA automation or automation developer as a title used to attract talent. But I started finding that like budgets definitely weren't aligning with some of the titles being used, which, you know, we're going to dive into salaries a little bit later on in the presentation. But I just want to kind of briefly cover what I see as far as like job titles and how it's kind of interpreted from a recruiter side. And if you want to talk about like resumes or anything kind of around this, I'm happy to do that at another time. But traditionally like QA tester or analyst denotes manual testing roles, still heavily involved in shaping the overall quality of the process, but more of like an advocate from the end user's perspective, and typically heavier on UI or front end testing. And then there's also QA engineer, which when a position states like engineer, I feel like it typically tends to mean developer, or at a minimum like a developer mindset, with exceptional like QA and testing knowledge as well. But there's a little bit more involvement in like the release process, both defining and ensuring features and changes are being released with like minimal negative impact, and involved in a little bit of everything from testing, a little bit of coding, process improvement, and being that champion of quality. And then QA engineers are also expected to have a strong understanding of various testing tools, but not necessarily required to like develop a full framework. That tends to fall more into those SDET titles. And I feel like there's so many different flavors of this that get used that I can't even keep up with it half the time. It's, I'm sure for you guys, it's pretty frustrating too. I'm like, okay, just tell me what you need and we can work on a title later and come back to that. But I just kind of stick to this because it's easy for me to say and it's pretty uniform. And I know that if somebody's telling me they want an SDET, I'm like, cool, you want somebody that can develop automated testing tools and frameworks. But what I've seen more and more of with this title is having a lot of the integration and working with CI/CD pipelines and tools like Jenkins. I know Evan's talked a lot about that in the past. And so SDETs typically have many options to solve problems at different levels and participate at the beginning of the development phase. I've also seen an increase in test automation architects requests from companies. And I feel like it may be later on in their process that they're like, oh shoot, we need this person. So there's a lot of challenges that these people have to take on. But essentially, what kind of falls under this bucket is somebody who's an expert in agile testing and end-to-end testing with a know-how to bring it to like the next level and work closely with stakeholders to optimize how they do things and be that advocate for testing across the business. And so I feel like there's just so many different flavors of this that we can go into. But a lot of the challenges that I've been finding is, hiring managers reach out and they say, hey, we need a QA engineer that can do all these things, but they start setting kind of unrealistic expectations on that person. And what I'm finding is it's like they want essentially an SDET or an automation architect, but they want it to fall within like a QA engineer budget. And that sometimes, can be a difficult conversation to have with somebody. Because essentially they're wanting a developer with a QA mindset or a really strong QA that like understands coding and the software development lifecycle. And so it's like finding a unicorn essentially when you start looking at some of these job requirements. And I'm sure many of you have like seen this firsthand, that you apply to a job, once you kind of dive into it, you're like, wait, this isn't exactly what you had listed there. And so I've had to do a lot of consulting about changing titles for jobs and just making sure that things are being advertised the correct way and that the budgets are aligning. Because I feel like there's just been more and more responsibilities kind of piled on top of QA, but they're not increasing the salary to meet like everything that these people are doing. And so that's been an interesting kind of trend, I guess, that I've seen happen over the past couple of years that I've been in this space. I'd love to get kind of y'all's opinions on that too later. And then I want to dive into get my thing to work next, languages. So full transparency, this is not my chart. I did not make this. This came from Andrew Knight off Automation Panda. I was looking just for some more information on Python, and he kind of broke it down like this, and he uses 8 different criteria to evaluate languages. This isn't necessarily specific for one type of industry or type of product. I'm going to send the links out so y'all can kind of see a little bit more about this, but I just thought it was kind of a neat breakdown of the different languages and maybe what they're better for. But essentially kind of what I've seen over the past few months is, of course, Python is hot right now. More and more companies are requesting that as a programming languages that QA is proficient with. If I can recommend just like one language to pick up and learn and add to your toolbox, it's Python. It's heavily used in data science, and it's one of the most popular languages in the world right now. Based on like Indeed and Dice reports, Python and automation, if you did like a simple job search for requirements, that yields almost twice as many vacancies as like Java and automation, for example. And I've just heard it's like super easy to learn compared to other languages if you're wanting to pick up on something new. And there are just many companies that are also open to Python instead of like Ruby, which for whatever reason, and I really want to hear y'all's opinions on this, is I was talking to my colleagues about this just before this, is like, why is everyone all of a sudden needing Ruby experience? And I've been asking, I know many of y'all on here, I've asked y'all this question, and I've heard kind of two things. Is it's been around for a really long time, so people have already have it, they're working with it, it's just easy, like we don't want to change. Or there are startups that are using it because it's really quick to release. And so that's kind of another reason why I really recommend, learning Python or adding it to your toolbox, because it can also go in place of some of those requirements looking for Ruby. I'd say that JavaScript is definitely kind of like maybe that third one. That's a pretty solid requirement that I see a lot of people requesting. And then Java and C# are really close followers to that. But I guess just kind of, if anyone wants to speak up, have you guys seen like an uptick in Ruby or kind of Python being requested or used?
Python, absolutely. Not so much Ruby in my current company.
Python and JavaScript, yes, but not Ruby.
Okay.
So we tried Ruby. I mean, specifically, I tried to have our organization use it, and it built a suite around it through our spec many years ago. And we ended up with Python because the team was more familiar with Python, and based on team familiarity and the available test frameworks, we went with Python. My guess with the Ruby situation, maybe it's water, or maybe there's some unknown framework or test suite that just spawned up and everyone's using now, or startups with our spec and Rails, some quick prototype or something like that. But that's a guess.
No, that's a good point. I'd be curious to ask Yael what frameworks they're using and why would they. Okay, no, thank you. That's an interesting point. That's why I wanted to ask. And so, yeah, we can definitely talk a little bit more about that too. And then making sure my animations are in line, right? So yeah, let's dive a little bit more, I guess, into some of the technology trends that are kind of on the rise. Some of these things I'm sure y'all have noticed kind of increasing in demand over the past couple of years, but I feel like has become more prevalent as we've shifted towards this virtual and kind of remote world. One of those things being mobile. It's no surprise that there's a rise in mobile apps on the market. And so there's going to be a large need for mobile testing and mobile automation. Companies that didn't have a mobile option prior to 2020, I found quickly had to pivot, make sure they had that option for their users, as well as just kind of having people on that can do mobile testing for all of these new features, and especially in like the e-commerce space. I mean, everyone, you have to have online ordering and those different types of platforms now. And so what kind of goes pretty hand in hand with mobile is also performance testing. I feel like that wasn't always like a hard requirement that I've seen from people, but over the past several months, it's been more and more coming up in conversation, like, hey, we need somebody that can definitely do performance testing or even performance engineering, which I feel like is a whole nother conversation. But really it's because of the frequent releases due to like the changing markets, and just trying to reduce those performance glitches and bottlenecks at an earlier stage. I know that I was looking for some stats on this too, and I found that like over half of sites are abandoned within the first 3 seconds if it doesn't load properly. And for me personally, I know that I will definitely X out of something if it doesn't load immediately. And I'm like, oh my God, where's QA? So it's no surprise that there's an emphasis on performance testing. And also since, DevOps teams are continuously deploying applications so rapidly, performance engineering of these apps has been in high demand here recently. And so I've seen an increase in that, and using tools like JMeter, Gatling. I know there are other ones too that I'm not mentioning here, but there's been a rise in that. As well as too, now that we've gone very much remote and virtual, accessibility testing having to create software that's accessible for all customers, and accessibility testing has become more and more significant and will continue to rise over the next year. People who have disabilities are relying on digital services more than ever for remote work, education, healthcare, banking, shopping. I feel like it probably falls in almost every industry that this is an underserved market. And so there will be a jump in companies investing in this type of testing to improve their customer experience. I know that we tend to work on a lot of like contract QA roles where this is something that's been a really important factor to have. And so API testing, this has been a fun one. It's been a common trend for years, and I'm sure it will continue to expand into needing this and to understand how to automate API tests and leverage it for monitoring purposes, especially with the enhancement of microservice architecture on the web, as well as just like software development. The usage of APIs is growing every day, and so automation around this has been in much higher demand. I also want to note that like be on the lookout for blockchain testing and businesses within like crypto, automotive, and finance. I've seen more and more of those types of opportunities coming up, and I feel like we could probably have a whole presentation on blockchain and crypto and security in that kind of space. But I'll put a pin in that and move on to security testing. That's just really increased because people are growing more aware of the importance of this, as there's been a lot more, I guess, awareness to it. and it kind of goes into my next point is cloud. I feel like that kind of goes hand in hand with security. I feel like this has been the buzzword of 2020 is cloud. Everyone mentions it and brings it up. And a big part of it is because like there's been billions of dollars going into moving companies over to cloud-based storage. And so over the next year, we're going to continue to see a rise in this and more automation needed as companies are using cloud-hosted web and mobile application automated testing platforms like Sauce Labs to run against the different devices that customers are using to interact with them. And so I've even had conversations with companies where it's like, okay, you want somebody that has it, but it's still pretty new. Not everybody's going to have worked for a company that does that. And so they're being more and more flexible with just having like certifications. If you had asked me, a year and a half ago, like, does it matter if I get this certification? I'd probably been like, oh, it probably doesn't. It's more about experience. But now those certifications are becoming, holding more weight and getting people more interviews, just having, the familiarity and being able to talk around it. And so we're going to continue to see more of that. But to just continuous integration and deployment and automation pipelines. This has become more and more of a request for SDETs. And I always thought that it tended to fall more into the DevOps bucket. And so I've even seen like some weird titles where it's like QA ops, dev test ops. And I'm like, okay, so we're just going to keep combining different roles together is what it feels like, and making more people hold more and more responsibilities. And so it's just been so weird to watch the evolution, I feel like, of QA and SDET into this now dev test ops, which to me is just such a funny title. But it is becoming more and more of a request by people. And I guess I'm curious for you guys, has this been something that y'all have experienced maybe in like smaller companies where you are taking on more of those responsibilities, or what are kind of y'all's thoughts?
So I work at a small company, and we've been moving this direction towards dev test ops, not just because we need people to wear multiple hats, but we're trying to get the testing to be as close to production as possible. Mm-hmm. So where your actual end product is running. So instead of just relying on the functional testing in the middle, we do a lot of early testing of the product through automation. And then as we integrate the system, especially since we do try to do CI/CD work, we need to have some coverage of how is it actually working in production. Mm-hmm. And really the best people to do that are the people who were involved throughout the project, which usually means the testers. And they can help point out where things are not working as expected in the cloud environment.
Okay, that makes sense. Does anybody else have any kind of like opinion or thoughts on that?
We don't have a separate DevOps team in our company. It's a small company, but like developers and QA try to get those things done with, like, devs help us. Basically, we're trying to move in that direction, but a lot of the times devs help us to get the CI/CD pipelines done, and also if needed, like it's not a devs only effort, it's both QA and dev effort. So we see it that way, and they help and we help as well. So that's how it's going right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I was in the same situation as that pretty much, where it's just a small company aspect of really trying to get everyone to do everything, which is just what it is. But our the current team I'm on is growing, and we've just kind of really taken on a title, and we're running with that title now. So that's my take on that as well. So same situation, small company.
Okay. Are y'all using, because I've never really seen that title like advertised as far as like somebody hiring, like, oh, I'm looking for a dev test ops or QA ops even. That's really not, it's more of like an evolution, I guess, in your own position.
I haven't seen that either. I mean,
Sure.
there's like maybe like blog articles a while ago kind of on those topics, but I mean, more so ourselves included, this is what I'm currently working on, is utilizing observability to kind of take that testing and production aspect of we want to deploy, but we want to monitor and get those instantaneous results, as opposed to and have like a very strict, and this is what I did years ago, is just get the super strict suite of tests, automated tests, and then they run through, and then we kind of like A/B test, or we do A/B test, and we kind of get that instantaneous feedback. So that's kind of the idea. That's at least what we're doing. Everyone's different, but that's our dev test ops.
We have a lot of people who make the transition from test automation or test automation, senior, to DevOps, and there's no real reason for them to keep the QA title. The companies want them to keep the QA title because they can pay them less. So yeah, there's a big company incentive to have those people cross over because they can pay them less for basically a DevOps job.
Yeah. I've had that happen pretty frequently, where it's like they're not happy with candidates I find, but then they're like, oh, well, I'll take somebody that does DevOps. And I'm like, you want the budget of a different person though. So it's just kind of, it's interesting. And it kind of segues nicely into my next slide. Oh, if I can click it right, I think this is probably a little blurry, but this is just kind of like a quick chart that I've put together, kind of just based off of what I've seen on the market. But I feel like even today, looking at this needs to be changed still, because like we were just saying, they're piling on more responsibilities for people, but still trying to keep it within that lower budget range. And I feel like that's been one of the biggest challenges here. So this is probably pretty skewed if we're looking at two companies that are, trying to come to Austin and from California and hiring remote. That's seen definitely an increase in some of those salary expectations. And this is geared more towards kind of that SDET or automation for QA. And it really does kind of vary to these salary bands based on, what languages you're using, what kind of company you're working for, and the responsibilities. So if you want to dive into like your personal salary stuff, we can talk about that later. But I too kind of just gathered like some information on like average salaries for just like automation engineer in Austin, and that was about $105,000 annually. And then just like an average QA engineer was about $90,000, and that even increased about 2% last year. And I feel like now, as more of those responsibilities like developer and DevOps are being pushed onto QA, we're going to continue to see an increase in salary, for this field, which it has been, definitely a good thing if you're going to add more workload to somebody. It's just making sure that you're kind of able to back that up when you're asking for those things. And that kind of goes really nicely, like I feel like into some of the points that I want to make about just like staying competitive and being able to ask for those higher rates. Because it is changing. And I feel like sometimes they may not understand what's going on in the market until you're unhappy and looking for something. And then you realize it. And it's like, you just need to have an open conversation, with your employer and what you're doing. Don't be afraid to do that. Because I feel like sometimes people jump ship for the wrong reasons, when really it's something that could probably be addressed and kind of talked through, where, you don't have to necessarily make a move. But I want to cover just a few things about, like, I guess, staying competitive, and what I've seen increase as far as, requests from companies is, like I said before, kind of that API backend testing, wanting more and more of that. Automation framework development, ideally from scratch, even if it's something that you've done like on personal projects, like, don't be afraid to mention it and have links to your GitHub or, wherever you have that sitting for technical managers to look at. Any kind of work with continuous integration or deployment is definitely, if you're taking on some of those duties now, but maybe it doesn't fall under your job title, like, be sure to mention those things and stuff that you've accomplished. Cloud experience, like I kind of mentioned before, even if it's like certifications, like that is definitely like puts people above when you're applying for a job. If you can list that you have that AWS like cloud certification, that'll sometimes yield a quicker response from a hiring manager versus not having it. As well as to, like I said, like JMeter, any kind of performance testing, seen a rise in that. And then I also wanted to touch on like coding boot camps. So as it's kind of shifting more towards that like developer and test. If you come from more of that manual side, don't be afraid to still, like, if you're interested in it, of course, expanding on that and doing the boot camps or some kind of, there's different kind of classes that they have, and adding that to your profile. Because if that's the route you're trying to get into, now is kind of the time where companies are looking at that more, and they want to bring people up within their organization because they see the value. They're starting to see it more and more in QA and SStats and the impact that they're having. And so I feel like there's going to be more flexibility around, you don't have to have necessarily a bachelor's degree, but show that you're building upon your skill set and you're constantly learning. I think that's more about what people want to see for that. So, tab, sorry. So yeah, I kind of want to open it up, like if there's feedback on anything, if anybody has like a better explanation for some of the stuff that I've covered or insight into it. Are there any new tools that you guys are using that you're just like really excited about that are kind of replacing some old stuff that makes sense? What other trends have y'all noticed as far as, maybe there's things that I didn't cover, or we could do, another talk another time that covers something specific here. I really kind of want to open it up to you guys to kind of share what y'all's experience has been like.